How's this? All right. Starting again, I'm Jerry Kellman. I'm Senior Advisor of the National Community Reinvestment Coalition based in D.C. We helped Housing Oregon put together this day, which is with a focus on community reinvestment and on economic justice. And you're in a workshop on Justice 40, and I'll be talking a little bit. In addition, Bryan, Guiney, who's Director of the Oregon Field Office for the U.S. Office of Housing and Urban Development, will be speaking, and Kathleen Compton, who's Regional 10 Climate Coordinator for the Environmental Protection Agency, will be talking. And we hope you have things that you'll learn from, but we may well have things that we learn from you, I think, and that we're hoping for that also. So I'll make a few opening comments, and then Kat and Bryan will drill down a little bit into how HUD and EPA are beginning this. So this is very much in flux, by the way. We're very grateful for both of them jumping in when there is in flux. Sometimes the government doesn't want to talk too much until they've defined exactly how something's going to happen. Some of this isn't fully defined, but please consider that. And while we're going to talk about Justice 40, we're also going to talk broadly, I think, about EPA and HUD in this area of justice and community. So you'll hear it both today. So the National Community Reinvestment Coalition helped groups in Oregon, Housing Oregon, and other groups in the Pacific Northwest negotiate 3 community benefit agreements with major banks that serve Oregon during the past year. One we received an award at lunch, Umpqua Bank, committed to an $8.1 billion community benefits agreement over 5 years, the communities of the Pacific Northwest and Northern California. And then 2 other banks, much larger banks, will also serve Oregon, US Bank, and then BMO Bank, which you may not know, but they've acquired Bank of the West. So if there's a Bank of the West branch in your neighborhood, now it probably has a BMO sign up. And these are examples of community reinvestment that can really make a difference in the neighborhood. So this workshop's included because it's another form of reinvestment. It's government reinvestment in your communities. And so after we talk specifically about some of how this is beginning to shape up at the federal and regional level, we'll return to some of those issues around community reinvestment. But let me start with Bryan, and I've asked them to introduce themselves, which is poor form, but I don't have their bios, so I've only been on 2 Zoom calls with each of them, and that's probably not knowing them well enough to introduce them. So jump in, and Bryan, wherever you'd like to be.
All right. Hey, good morning, everybody. Bryan Guiney, I am your Oregon Field Office Director for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Happy to see so many familiar faces and friends in the crowd. I've been your Field Office Director here in Oregon for HUD for just about a year. Prior to that, I served as the Director of Community Planning and Development. That's the division of HUD that does the formula and competitive grants for Oregon and Idaho. I worked for Business Oregon, the state's economic development agency, so I've been a grantee of HUD and now on the HUD side of it, and then spent 21 years in the Marine Corps working on community and security projects all over the world. So happy to be here today and to be able to talk to you about this really critical work. Some of it HUD has been doing since our creation out of the Fair Housing Act and the Civil Rights Act, and some of it very new with this administration. So thank you.
Great. Good morning, everyone. I'm Kat Compton. I am the EPA Region 10 Climate Coordinator, so leading a lot of the climate programs funded by the Inflation Reduction Act, which we will talk a lot about today. EPA Region 10 is Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Alaska, and the 271 tribal nations that live within those states. So that gives you a flavor. There's someone like me in all of our EPA regional offices, of which there are 10. And so if you are visiting from somewhere outside of EPA Region 10, reach out to me and I can put you in touch with my counterpart and make sure that you have a local contact. I think we'll get started with your presentation and then I'll say some words and then we'll discuss. Okay.
And we need, your slide.
Hey, there we go.
Good, great. All right.
All right, well, I'm going to stand, one, so I can see the slides, and too, because I've been sitting a lot this morning. Again, Bryan Guiney with HUD. Pleased to be joined today. We've got two of our HUD team members from Oregon in the audience, Kirsten Ray in the Office of Field Policy and Management, and Leah Anderson from the Policy Development and Research arm. So I'm happy to take all the easy questions. If you've got difficult or hard questions, you can please send them over that direction. So, just kidding. So a little bit of framing of our work, HUD's work in Oregon. Some of this information may be new to you. Most of it is what your organizations and what you personally work with day in and day out throughout the state. So we got about 4.3 million folks. The Oregon gained a whole 10% of its population just in the last decade, 2012 to 2022. Picture a whole nother Clackamas County moving into the state. We gained a 6th congressional district because of that, but you sure don't see us building roads, bridges, schools, childcare centers, housing, hospitals at a rate of that influx of population. So that's contributing to our second to last bullet, 18,000 folks homeless, 61% of those unsheltered across the state. That is the last official point in time count, which was conducted in the winter of 2022. And then I think I mentioned we have 47 HUD staff that are based right here in Oregon. The 2022 annual homeless assessment report to Congress. So after your organizations and communities across the state conduct a point in time count, HUD gets all the data. About 6 months after that, a report goes to Congress. The most recent one is the 22. We're still crunching the 2023 data. By all indications, it's going to be much worse than the 2022 data, particularly in the West Coast and here in Oregon. But when compared with all other states, Oregon is number 4 for folks experiencing homelessness that are unsheltered. California, Mississippi, and Hawaii are ahead of us. We had the second largest absolute increase in homelessness during the pandemic. We are number 1 in percentage-wise of people with families and children that are unsheltered, and we're number 1 with folks with chronic conditions that are unsheltered. Again, no surprise to anybody in the room. It's kind of, you know, this story is kind of hard to tell when the numbers are just so big and so extreme. Yep. And then the last bullet, we're in the top 10 of states where folks are rent burdened, paying over 25% of their income for rent. Yes.
You say that the last bullet point was 9% of income, over 25%.
Over 25% of their income on rent. Okay. Continuing, 4,300 homes destroyed in 2020 and the 2021 wildfires. The estimated $1.3 billion in unmet need. Congress allocated $422 million. Oregon needs to add about 584,000 homes in the next 20 years. Right now at about 20,000 units per year. We're barely on track to meet half of that. And a nationwide shortage of certain electrical components and electrical transformers is severely impacting the opening and finishing the construction of publicly supported housing developments. That last point has gone all the way up to the Secretary of HUD. The Department of Energy has petitioned the Defense Department to invoke the Defense Production Act, specifically around transformer production. So many of you here have been involved in some of the grassroots advocacy to get this national attention for that. So how is HUD organized and aligned to address these challenges? We've got 5 key ecosystems in how the department organizes its service delivery. Access to affordable rental homes, probably the programs that folks are most familiar with, project-based rental assistance, housing choice vouchers, programs to get folks into rental homes who qualify at income levels. Home ownership and housing market stability. This is where FHA comes in with their home loans or other things around the home ownership opportunities. Housing quality and improved living conditions. These are the inspections, the standards, the enforcement of publicly supported housing that has living condition issues. Economic growth and community resilience. We'll talk about this a lot today with climate mitigation and disaster recovery funds. And then fair housing and equal opportunity enforcement. So as part of our HUD staff in Oregon, we have badged fair housing enforcement folks. We work through the Fair Housing Council of Oregon, which is here, and the Bureau of Labor and Industries in the state on enforcing and prosecuting fair housing violations that happen within the state. All right, so HUD in Oregon, it's about $7 billion a year that comes into the state. The vast majority of that, you would not even know HUD is involved. This is mortgage insurance, either through FHA for first-time home borrowers, no or low down payment, single-family home ownership loans, or on the other side, the very large housing production loans and mortgage insurance for multifamily housing units. These are either income restricted or folks for seniors or disabilities. This is where the private market comes in, and they get the loans from the government to build the affordable housing, the large affordable housing complexes. The second bucket, rental assistance, Section 8 contracts, contracts with individual landlords, housing choice vouchers, the funding for the housing authorities, which are also here represented in the room today, and then project basing those vouchers to put into bricks and sticks development. And then the third bucket, the annual grants that come out. Some are formula to cities, states, counties, tribes, annual funding that you can depend on in 5-year kind of planning cycles, and then competitive grants for the continuum of cares, nonprofits, homeless service providers. Some of these are formula every year. Others are special competitions that come out, particularly when other parts of the country are not spending their money as fast, and it gets recaptured, and then we're able to redeploy those into states like Oregon who can spend money much faster. All right, pursuing environmental justice. Why we're actually here today. All the stuff. 7 days after President Biden was inaugurated, he signed an executive order on the climate crisis and the kind of whole of government, how the administration was going to put climate mitigation and resiliency kind of front and center in all of the work of the executive branch agencies. For HUD, environmental justice means equal protection from environment and health hazards and providing equal and meaningful opportunity for community participation. Community participation has always been baked into HUD programs since the beginning. The majority of what we do is a funder of funders, and so we deploy funds throughout the country, and local communities, organizations, governments get to decide within the parameters established by Congress, but local control of how those funds are developed, understanding that local folks on the ground will know best how to deploy those resources. That is absolutely baked into this as well for environmental justice for achieving a healthy environment. Piloting new models for Section 3, if you're not familiar, Section 3 is a requirement that if there's federal funding for housing and economic development, that low-income individuals have an opportunity to compete for federal contracts for that, and that we're enabling those businesses to become subcontractors, and then if they've been subcontractors, to become the general contractor, and to empower individuals and businesses to do the actual work with your tax money in these projects. And then reducing and preventing lead poisoning through our existing lead control programs. This is the Healthy Homes Grant. I think most recently Medford got $3 or $4 million here in the state to replace aging lead pipes throughout the city. So that's a competitive program, but Oregon usually does pretty well in applying for that program. So a couple of resources that came out, and I'm sure these slides will be available to everybody after this presentation, or if you track one of us down, we can make sure we get this to you. Some stuff to check out, HUD's new climate action plan, and this is kind of nested within the national blueprint for decarbonization of the transportation sector. This is where HUD comes in with money available for things like EV charging stations in publicly supported housing projects, or solar panels, or things that are going to make our projects, or our publicly supported projects, last longer and be more carbon neutral. We have the HUD Community Resilience Toolkit. I'll talk about that in a second. Then we've got a couple community guides for navigating just all the different amount of funding that are out there from all these different agencies and in all these different programs. The Community Resilience Toolkit. So this is for small cities, counties, basically anybody come take a look at how communities can become better resilient to this. And this is a national toolkit, but I look around the list here. The sea level rise, Cannon Beach is actively working on trying to prevent coastal erosion for their communities. Extreme heat, as you all know, we've had 3 consecutive years of heat dome events here in Multnomah County. In 2021, 96 folks died as a result of the heat dome here. 2022, it was only 5, and this year, I believe it was only 6. So a lot of your organizations and a lot of the resources since 2020 in getting air conditionings, heat pumps, building, making sure as Oregon Housing Community Services or other funders score projects that those that have air conditioning and things like that, it's become an annual thing now for just filtering out wildfire smoke that comes in and sits in parts of the state for months at a time. So extreme heat, no surprise here. Landslides, Coastal Highway 101 deals with landslides every year. Wildfires statewide, drought, half of the state in the eastern side was in a drought emergency this year declared by the governor. And then inland flooding, if you all remember pre-COVID, the actual first disaster of 2020 was the massive flooding out by Pendleton and even far east of Pendleton that required some major relocation of folks. And then 15, 20 days later, COVID kind of happened and everybody moved on to the crisis of the day. Okay, want to talk about Justice 40. This is the actual mechanism within the president's executive order on climate of how the executive level agencies will actually do the work. It's a whole government initiative. It's never been done before, aligning all these different federal agencies with a directive that 40% of the overall benefits of climate, clean energy, affordable sustainable housing, water, and other investments will go into disadvantaged communities. And the need for this came as a result of all these new funding bills that came out of COVID. The Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the American Rescue Plan. And so 40% of the benefits have to go to disadvantaged communities. What is a disadvantaged community? Communities are considered disadvantaged if they're in census tracts that meet the thresholds for at least one of the tools category, but that's basically a long word salad until you actually go down in the map and see like where the communities are, or if they're within lands that border the 9 federally recognized tribes in Oregon. 121 tribes in the Northwest, 271. The majority of those are in Alaska, but we have our 9 tribes here in the state. And particularly for housing, it is specifically called out a disadvantaged community, historic underinvestment, 90 percentile for housing, lack of green space, lack of indoor plumbing, or lead paint. And so where does that actually look like? So there's a national tool, and I'm sure you're going to talk about it, the Climate Economic Justice Screening Tool that you can all go to and drill down into the census tract by state where these communities are. I've just pulled up a couple, the Portland snapshot, East Portland, Rockwood, Eugene, Salem, Medford, most of rural Oregon. Again, if you live here, work here, do the work here, this is not a surprise, unfortunately. So HUD has identified 24 programs that either we're already putting at least 40% of the benefit of those programs into these communities already, or programs are going to be looked at for making sure that they're not just going to the same old recipients year in and year out because your organization or community knows HUD funding and programs and how to get the applications in, but how to actually make sure that the resources from those programs are being directed into the communities that are called out here. And so what that looks like for HUD's kind of flagship programs. I'll talk about a minute on the grant side. Community Development Block Grant, the Home Investment Partnership Program, the Housing Trust Fund, the annual formula grants that go to counties, cities, the state of Oregon, and then on the Housing Authority side, the Housing Choice Vouchers and the Project-Based Vouchers. On the lending product side, the 221D4 is HUD's flagship multifamily loan for lenders, for profit or nonprofit developers that come in. They get these loans, most always in combination with tax credits, and they're able to do massive developments. What is baked into these program requirements that is in line with Justice 40? I'm not going to read the entire list, but the programs were designed, 70% of funds in CDBG have to be deployed for low and moderate income. CDBG, disaster recovery, the fire recovery money that's coming here, it can't just go to the whole state, even though the state is the recipient of it. It's got to go to the most impact and distressed communities within the state. And in Oregon, with their disaster recovery plan, that is the main counties that were affected by the fire. Home investment funds, there's affordability periods, 20 years for new construction, 5 to 15 years for rehab. The different multifamily loan programs, there's age restrictions, there is area medium income restrictions, and for the FHA loans, I'll just talk for a second. The FHA loans go to individual buyers, first-time homes, first-time families. The forbearance emergency measures that were put through for COVID kept 21,000 Oregonians, homeowners, in their homes. These are emergency measures that FHA put through their private lenders, and that's 21,000 more people that are not homeless, or they're not being served by your organizations, or they're freeing up other resources, and now past the COVID emergency are still homeowners. Who we serve, this is just a snapshot, the direct annual funding, 19 communities in Oregon, cities, counties. For the states, Oregon Housing Community Services receives the home funds and the Housing Trust Fund and the ESG funds. Business Oregon administers the CDBG for everybody that's not one of these cities on the left. And then the Oregon Health Authority administers the funds, HOPWA funds, Housing for People with AIDS, and other of the health-related funds. We're also working with them on the Medicaid 115 waiver that was passed that will allow a couple states who've applied for this to start billing Medicaid costs related to housing, short-term rental assistance, ADA improvements, things like that, to Medicaid. And then the 8 continuum of cares across the state. We fund through OHCS the community action agencies, the frontline workers for getting folks rehoused and connected to services all across the state. We work through the 22 public housing authorities, 20 on the Oregon side, and then the 2 on the Washington side that are served out of the Portland field office. And then there's a little over 450 privately owned multifamily properties that receive HUD contracts for keeping rents at protected periods of rent, owned and operated by independent owners, and those are all across the state. So that's kind of a snapshot of everything we're doing in the state right now. I'm going to pause for a second and then move into our current projects and the funding that's actually open now from the Inflation Reduction Act, if I'm still good on time. Oh, good, okay. All right, 2 big announcements in Oregon just last week. $1 million in a competitive application went to Central Oregon Intergovernmental Council through JBAR, Youth Services in Bend, for the Youth Homeless Demonstration Project. Only 16 communities in the country were awarded these funds, and the only one in Region 10 came here to Central Oregon. $1.4 million to the Oregon Health Authority for AIDS and HIV housing programs, and then $7.5 million earlier this month to the Warm Springs Tribe for housing production. Earlier this year, we had a special Continuum of Care competitive award, again, funds that were not being spent or couldn't be spent fast enough in the rest of the country, repurposed back to Oregon. The Rural Oregon Continuum of Care applied for funds, and the Joint Office of Homeless Services here in Portland applied for funds. $8 million to the Joint Office, $1 million to the Rural Oregon Continuum of Care. Funds that would not have come to Oregon had not somebody raised their hand and said, we've got the need, we've got the data to back it up, and if you deploy these funds in Oregon, we will spend them and we'll get them out on the street as other states are not moving so fast. So we produced at the field office a rural Oregon housing toolkit for small communities or folks that are just looking for a place to start of like, how do I bring affordable housing development in my community? What are all the different programs between HUD, U.S. Department of Housing, rural development, EPA, DOT, like what are all the programs and how can they actually apply to my community? We had the lead hazard reduction healthy homes grant. And then we've been around the state conducting several funding one-stop kind of roundtable funding forums. We will go, if a community has a couple projects that are not shovel ready, but they're getting the capital stack together. Maybe they've got donated land from the city or county. Maybe they have a private or nonprofit developer. Maybe they've got an application into OHCS. We'll sit there with our colleagues from EPA, with USDA RD, with all of the state agencies that touch housing, DLCD, Business Oregon, OHCS, Oregon DEQ, and we'll kind of workshop like, okay, this is your project, what's the funding gap, and then who's got resources for this, and what are the terms, and is it loan or grant, and we'll kind of work one-on-one with the communities. We do these particularly in rural Oregon, the places that do not have 20 folks on staff for the housing authority, or it's the city manager and the part-time person trying to collect the water bills. Like they can't even start affordable housing, and there's all this money out there from all these new federal acts, but it's like you can't even get to it. So we'll come out in these communities if we're invited, and we'll do these funding workshops. And then we just finished up a project. We got a project team nationally, interagency project team to do a scan on childcare facilities in publicly supported housing and where are the gaps and where are some of the programs. And we're gonna, in the next couple of weeks, we'll be presenting this to the state of Oregon and the governor's office with all the work that they're doing on childcare and affordable housing of like, here's where the federal funds can come in for this project. Funding that's open now, and again, all this, we're here all week, so we can come talk in a lot more detail about this. The Green Resilient Retrofit Program. This is for multifamily properties that are assisted by HUD, the 811 program, the 202 program, or Section 8 project-based rental assistance. If these multifamily programs are recapitalizing, there's grant money available, and I've got some more detailed slides on this, but there's grant money available for window upgrades, solar panels, anything kind of climate resilient expenses. It's a pretty narrow window of who can apply for it in the state, but we've been trying to get the word out. There's 450 HUD multifamily assisted properties in Oregon. We think there's probably 200 properties across the state that would be in a position right now to apply or to qualify for these funds.
And we should probably move it along.
Yeah, no problem. Couple other grant programs that are open right now, a couple other stuff coming soon. This is the Green Resilient Retrofit Program. If you're a multifamily property and you're receiving Section 8 PBRA 202 or 811, let's talk this week, or if you know somebody, or if you've got one of these developments in your communities, because this is some of the stuff that this grant program will pay for. There's 3 tranches of awards. So there's large developers, medium size, and then mom and pop landlord owners to get these projects out in the communities. A couple other technical assistance programs we have open right now. Happy to talk to you all about this as long as you want for the next couple days. Talked about some of the work we're doing in rural Oregon. This is where we've been this year for funding workshops or sitting down with local communities or just hearing from tenants organizations, just hearing about what is working or not working in publicly supported facilities. So to be relevant and responsive, we've got to be out actually in the community, and we try to get our staff out as much as we can all around the state. So there's our contact info, and that's my spiel.
Okay, it's hard to give a short talk about all of this work because there's just so much going on. There are so many funding opportunities. And so even if we had an hour to dig into 1 or 2 different grant opportunities, we still wouldn't be able to cover all the details. So that just tells me that the next steps, your homework, is to go find your contact at HUD, your contact at EPA, and to learn more about all of these funding opportunities. So these are teaser presentations, right? This isn't the end all be all. You have to come find us and learn more. All right, so I have got a slide deck, but while that's coming up, I thought I would just start by sharing my own climate story. I'm a Pacific Northwesterner. I was born and raised in Seattle, Washington. And the summers of my memory are beautiful, 80, 82 degree day. The city is lush, it's green. You feel a nice, cool marine breeze in the air. And wow, that wasn't the summer that we just had, right? It's raining now, but it didn't for a really long time. The air was dry and brittle. In recent years, we've had to make choices about whether we open our windows to cool our house at night or let wildfire smoke in and the indoor air quality impacts that can have. And until actually this summer, I was one of the very many households in Seattle and the Portland area that didn't have access to air conditioning. So that was a real choice that we were making. And then you layer on top of that, you know, it's almost a privilege to have that choice because those of us who have homes can choose whether or not we open our windows. And you saw some of the numbers that Bryan shared about homelessness in our region. So this is real, and it's really exciting that there is real money coming from across all of the federal families to really address some of these real pressing, impactful issues that our communities are facing. Next slide. Maybe. Here we go. So Bryan talked a lot about this already. The Justice 40 initiative is a whole of government approach with the goal of delivering 40% of the benefits of certain federal programs across the federal family to communities designated as disadvantaged. And you saw the slides with the maps of Oregon and the shading. So there's a CGES tool produced by the White House where you can go in and see which census tracts meet that definition. And in a lot of ways, you know, we're still working through what does benefit mean? And it's in some ways easier for us to think about money flowing into communities. So maybe our target is 40% of the funding that we have on offer is delivered into these communities that are shaded by this tool. But we can talk more about, you know, what does benefit mean? I think that would be a pretty interesting conversation. The Justice 40 initiative matches very well, aligns very well with how EPA defines environmental justice. Environmental justice is one of our 2 top priorities for the administration right now, alongside tackling the climate crisis. And much like HUD defines environmental justice, at EPA, environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement, and you will hear that time and time again, of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. So we envision an environmentally just community when we can experience the same degree of protection from environmental and health hazards and equal access to the decision-making process to have a healthy environment where we live, learn, and work. So that's our goal. It's a lofty goal. We have a lot of work to do, but it's worthwhile. And there's some funding now behind it. So we're really thinking about how do we leverage the power of the funding programs that we have to offer to achieve this goal. So if we're going to talk about 40% of the benefit, and we're going to use funding into communities as sort of a proxy for benefit at this point, how do we get money into communities that are disadvantaged, underserved, marginalized, and haven't necessarily accessed federal funding before? We have to expand our audience if we're going to meet that goal. And so how does EPA get money into communities? There are a couple different ways. One is we can make direct funding awards to community-based nonprofits, nonprofit organizations, partnerships of nonprofit organizations, direct funding into projects to support various goals across our portfolio. And so that's one way. It's relatively rare, although there are some good opportunities coming up funded through the Inflation Reduction Act and our environmental justice program, so I'll highlight those. The second is through existing partnerships. We spend a lot of time with our counterparts at the state or local government or tribal governments, funding them to then go out and execute environmental programs. And so that could be formula funding, that could be competitive funding, but we have a good, close relationship with Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, for example, to execute on behalf of all of us the environmental programs that we're charged to execute. And then there's this third category that we are growing up that I've started to call Fund the Funder model. If you have a better name, I'm all ears. And this is a way to get funds into communities that maybe haven't seen federal dollars before or not enough federal dollars without also then imposing federal reporting requirements on those communities. So the idea is that EPA makes a big award to a sophisticated nonprofit or a government or a lending organization that then takes on the burden of the reporting to EPA on behalf of all of their subgrantees. They're building programs where it's easier to apply, it's easier to navigate whatever the website is. You don't necessarily need a sam.gov or grants.gov registration, and you can still access that funding without necessarily having to know the ins and outs of the federal funding programs. And so all of these are going to support our mission to protect human health and the environment. It's just different avenues of funding, how we're moving money into communities. I keep forgetting that I am the controller of the slides. So you might hear about Justice 40. You might also hear, and Bryan talked a little bit about this too, you might start to see the term thriving communities pop up from across various federal agencies or partnerships of federal agencies. This is a term that we are using as a way to designate how we are executing our Justice 40 goals. So there's technical assistance, there might be grant programs that are branded thriving communities, and you should equate thriving communities with Justice 40. So in our case, if we're gonna get more money into communities that haven't seen funds before, we've got to provide some support for those communities to actually access funds. And so that's what the Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers are built to do. They help you jump through the hoops. I just love this image. And so they're a partnership between the EPA and the Department of Energy. They're big grants, $10 million or $12 million grants over 5-year periods to help with sam.gov and grants.gov registration, funding matchmaking, right? It's hard to keep track of all of the money that's coming through and making sense of it and knowing when to apply for which one and what federal agency is offering which. And oh my goodness, all of the climate grants have the exact same title, so what's the difference between them anyway, and am I eligible, and what's the timeline? That's really hard, and so these technical assistance centers are gonna be hopefully sort of the hub for some of that information, some matchmaking across the federal space, so not just EPA dollars, but also potentially HUD funding. There's 2 in EPA Region 10, which I believe is the same as HUD Region 10, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Alaska. They are the Willamette Partnership, which is based here in Portland, Oregon, and the University of Washington in Seattle. Those 2 organizations are meant to serve the entirety of our region. So if you need support to find funding, you need support in mapping out the partnerships that you're gonna need to be competitive for that funding, you want some grant writing support, you need some sam.gov registration support, maybe you even need support once you have the funding, meeting all of the reporting requirements, doing that grant management side of things, reach out to these technical assistance centers because that's exactly what they're here to do. Okay, also thriving communities. As part of the Justice 40 Thriving Communities Environmental Justice Portfolio at EPA, there's a new grant that we expect to be announced any day. So the grant application period has closed for the big award from EPA. And this is our Environmental Justice Thriving Communities Grant Maker Program. This is that Fund the Funder model that I was talking about. So EPA expects to make up to 11 awards of $50 million. So there's some real money there that are gonna become these big grant makers. And those grant makers are gonna design more accessible, easily accessed sub-grant competitions. And those grant makers are then going to award funds out into the community for projects. And that's great because then the projects themselves don't necessarily have to report to EPA. That's the role of the grant maker. So I want you to keep an eye out for this. I can provide you some information to sign up for the Environmental Justice Listserv. And once these grant makers are announced, give them a little bit of time to get set up, but there's going to be money available that's EPA money, but that won't require an application directly to EPA. So the hope is that this is providing some of that ease of access to funding to communities that may not have a grant writer on staff, right? Or don't have the time to do the intensive management of a grant, administrative management of a grant with a federal agency and the time and energy that requires. And then the Inflation Reduction Act passed, and this was big. So we expect that the Inflation Reduction Act, if executed the way that it is intended, will help the US reduce our emissions by 40% by 2030. So it's 2023 and a half. This is big. This is almost half in the next 7 years. This is big. And so there's going to be some big changes, and we have money to support this goal. But we're going to see a lot of funding opportunities come out really, really quick with big, lofty goals, and we have to be ready to take it because Inflation Reduction Act, unlike some of the regular appropriation funding, this is a one-time funding bill. So this means that some of the grants that come out are going to be one-time offerings of huge sums of money, and then they might not come back again, right? So we've got to be ready to capture those funds as soon as they come out and make the best use of them to help accomplish this 40% reduction goal. At EPA, the Inflation Reduction Act allotted the agency about $40 billion to fund climate action across a very many number of programs. The big six are listed here. This represents about 98% of the funding that came to EPA through the Inflation Reduction Act. And today I'm just going to touch on the top three: the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, the Climate Pollution Reduction Grants, and the Environmental and Climate Justice Program grants that are coming up. There's lots more information. A lot of these programs are still under development, so if you are really interested in ports and all of the climate action and emissions reductions opportunities at ports, we can talk about that too, and I can share what I know. Okay, Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, another fund the funder model. I'm going to just talk about two parts of the GGRF, and the first is the Clean Communities Accelerator Program. This is a $6 billion grant program that's going to fund a very few number of these big hub nonprofits. And those hub nonprofits are then going to go out and provide sub-awards to local community lending institutions, CDFIs, other organizations locally in our communities that provide funding support to projects, either loans or grants or a combination thereof. And so this is it's almost a fund the funder, but you can't fit that onto a slide, and it's complicated. So I want to highlight this one. We expect that these hub nonprofits have until October 12th to submit their application to EPA. It's going to take us some time to review them, to make sure that their project ideas are sound, to identify the awardees, to announce them, and then to actually get them the money in hand. So, these community accelerators aren't going to see funding, and projects aren't going to see funding in our community. Maybe for another year or so. It could take some time to actually start to see the effect of this flow. But this is one to watch, and I really wanted to highlight it today because it's one of the very few places where in the Notice of Funding Opportunity, affordable and sustainable housing is listed in an EPA grant. And this is one of the challenges with EPA. Our mission is to protect human health and the environment. There is, of course, a housing intersect in that, But you're not likely to see affordable housing listed explicitly in a lot of the grant programs. So you need to make that connection yourself. But in this case, this is one of the focus areas that's been identified in this Community Accelerator program. So that's really exciting to me. It means that EPA is identifying, we understand the climate and housing connection, the climate and health and housing nexus. And so this is one to watch as the hub nonprofits are funded, as they start to develop their programs. There are likely opportunities to get involved with them early on to help them design what these programs are going to look like and how they're going to roll out into our communities. The other part of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund program that I want to talk about is the $7 billion Solar for All competition. Again, these are going to be very large awards to set up grants, loans, combination thereof to fund rooftop, community solar, associated grid upgrades, and storage capacity for low-income and disadvantaged communities. So this is just screaming affordable housing to me, and it's something that you should be aware of. Again, it's going to take some time for the funding structures to get stood up. These applicants still have a couple of weeks to even get their application to EPA, but this is something to watch. And I was actually just upstairs at the solar financing talk, just the session before this one. We talked a lot about Inflation Reduction Act tax incentives, but nobody mentioned the GGRF Solar for All program. And that makes sense. Tax incentives are available now. This is still going to take some time, but this is some real money coming into our region to support solar installation, distributed solar projects, and it's one to watch. You can find online the list of who all submitted a notice of intent to apply to the GGRF Solar for All program. So the known universe of applicants is out there, it's public knowledge. If you go on the website, you'll see that Oregon Department of Energy submitted a notice of intent to apply, so we're expecting that they'll come in with an application. If you work with tribal communities, the Affiliated Tribes of Northwest Indians submitted a notice of intent to participate, and then Warm Springs actually submitted an NOI as well to the GGRF Solar for All program. So we're going to watch and see. They're working furiously right now, getting their applications polished and into the system before the deadline. But this could mean hundreds of millions of dollars into the state to support these projects. I want to make sure that you all have the information that you need to access those funds when they become available. All right, the next big bucket of funding is a $5 billion climate pollution reduction grant program. This was a two-phase program. It's the second biggest program after the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund that was funded through the Inflation Reduction Act to EPA. We're currently in phase one. We have allocated $250 million nationally to states, municipalities, and tribal governments to engage in climate planning. In Oregon, Oregon Department of Environmental Quality is the statewide planner. Oregon Metro is running a regional planning process on behalf of the Portland, Vancouver, Hillsborough, MSA, Metropolitan Statistical Area. This is a census designation. It includes 2 counties in Washington. So they're thinking really hard about how do we do this climate work across state lines, across county lines, who's on first for what. And those climate plans are going to be, the first phase of the climate plans are going to be published publicly on March 1st of 2024. And that's really important because just last week, we announced the notice of funding opportunity for phase 2. There's $4.6 billion available now to start thinking about applying for to implement items listed in the plan that you are covered under. So you do not have to be a direct recipient of phase 1 funds. If you are a state, a municipality, a tribal government, a coalition of eligible entities, and you are covered under a plan, and the nice thing is if you are in Oregon or Washington or any state in Region 10, you are covered under a plan because all 4 of our states accepted climate planning funds, then you have access to this $4.6 billion of implementation funds. So don't apply right now. read the NOFO right now. The applications won't be due until after the plans are created. But what this tells me is that if you are interested in this $4.6 billion pot of funding, you'd better contact your planner and make sure that your priorities, the climate activities, emissions reductions work that you want to do is listed in a priority climate action plan due March 1st so that you still maintain your access to this NOFO. So reach out to me if you need to get connected with whoever the planner is in your region. Happy to help, but just want to make sure that this is on your radar as well, because it's a good pot of money for some really interesting work. All right, and then I think I've just got one more slide. Yep. Also want to put on your radar the Environmental Justice Community Change Grants. This is part of the third bucket that I was going to talk about from the Inflation Reduction Act. We expect that the EJ Community Change Grants, the Notice of Funding Opportunity is likely to come out sometime this fall, so next month or the month after-ish. That's the target. And these are going to be projects that are more of that sort of direct funding approach. So we're going to fund projects that reduce pollution, increase community resilience, build community capacity to respond to environmental and climate justice challenges. And we expect that those projects are going to be in sort of the categories of climate adaptation and mitigation, mitigating climate and health risks, so really thinking about extreme heat, urban heat island, wood smoke is a big one in the Pacific Northwest. These could be projects that are community-led pollution monitoring, so sort of citizen science projects, investments in low and zero emission technologies, workforce development. If we're going to deploy $7 billion for solar installations, we need a workforce that can do that can maintain those solar panels once they're installed. So we want to make sure that we're thinking about who has access to the jobs that are going to be created through other parts of the Inflation Reduction Act. Working on reducing indoor toxics or indoor air pollution, and then facilitating engagement of disadvantaged communities in state and federal workshops, rulemakings, other public processes. So that's environmental justice in practice. So I just want to put this on your radar. It's still under development. We don't know when the Notice of Funding Opportunity is going to come out, but it's an interesting model because unlike most federal programs where Notice of Funding Opportunity comes out and we say, congratulations, you have 60 days to put together a multifaceted partnership and really sophisticated program design and write 60 pages of an application and deliver it to EPA. And don't forget to update your SAM.gov registration. In this case, this is going to be a rolling application period. So Notice of Funding Opportunity is going to come out, and they're going to say something like, you have a year. You have a year to put together a project, and whenever you're ready and you feel like your project is got the partners involved that you need, you have a project design that you feel good about, then submit to EPA, and we will fund these on a rolling basis. So we'll evaluate them and fund them as they come in. So that's really interesting. I've never worked for a program that's got that format before, so there might be some kinks along the way we'll have to sort of work through. But I think that that's really interesting, and it's a way for us to demonstrate we're actually hearing people when they say, we can't apply for this big money in 60 days. We need time to build the connections. We need time to do idea generation. We need more support. So this is one way that we're really taking that feedback in and trying to implement our environmental justice and Justice 40 goals through a funding mechanism. Again, if you're interested in any of this, come talk to me. I'm happy to give you listservs that you can sign up for, put you in touch with climate or environmental justice coordinators across all of the EPA regions and make sure that you're connected. And then I've got just a quick list of resources here. EPA hosted an Investing in America Climate Action Funding Fair not too long ago, and we put together a whole list of not just EPA grants, but grants across all federal agencies that we could find, and they're grouped by sector. So you can go in and look in built environment or agricultural and working lands and see what kinds of funds might be available to help support your projects. There's a website just about the Inflation Reduction Act. If you are interested to learn more about how to interact with federal government in grant services, there's websites there that can help you walk through, how do I get registered so I can actually submit into grants.gov. And then I want you to email me if you have any questions. All right, that's all for me.
Actually, we have some more slides. Actually, we're going to open up questions to you. So, do you have anything back there?
Yeah, which slide are you looking for?
The maps? And then the other one after. They should be in order.
I'm sorry?
There. Yeah. Okay. So I'm just going to spend a minute on this because I want you to have time to dialogue and ask questions to Kat and to Bryan. So I'll leave my card up here, or you can talk to Kat or Bryan. But these are those two addresses will take you to interactive maps. And you can click on those maps and get data about the census tract that you work with or the census tracts you work with. And there's different data about your census tract, about depending on the EJ screen or the climate and economy justice screening tool. There'll be data about income, data about racial composition, about environmental history, about homelessness, about all kinds of things. And it's pretty illuminating if you haven't seen the data, and it's very accessible, and they're part of the tools of this process that Kat referred to in her comments. And I'm sure she can help you with that too, if you want to, or direct you to someone who can. Let's see. To click the red one.
I had to point toward the computer in the back.
Oh. Anyway, so I just wanted to introduce you to the tools. We don't need to spend a lot of time on this, but it's a visual way to understand that one way to look at it, justice for the implementation is by census tracts. The census tracts are, I don't know if you talk about them a lot, but in the work that we do about private reinvestment, census tracts are everything. That's how we measure whether banks are making investments in particular communities, whether those communities are communities of color, whether they're lower income communities, and the Home Mortgage Disclosures Act releases data on mortgages based on race for every census tract in America every year, and you can track what the banks are doing. And they're critical to us. We negotiate a community bench agreement with a bank to talk about the baseline for what they're doing in the census tracts and how to change that. So this is these are federal instruments which would help you and the agencies you're working with move towards seeing that justice authority is implemented. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say about that one. So I'm just gonna, we can send you this presentation. So I'll leave my card, and if you need it, let me know, and I'll send it to you. Okay, there's a last slide there, which isn't a map. There's one additional slide. So while she does that, before turning it back, I want to give you the context. So this day is about reinvestment and about economic justice. And so this really is a discussion, I think, of how the federal government reinvests in your communities. And that's why we wanted to drill down to that kind of specificity. But broadly speaking, what began this process, when you can get the other one up, let me know. What began this process is our work to ensure that banks reinvest in neighborhoods. And in the case of Oregon, the past year, we've done that through negotiating 3 large community benefits agreements with banks that serve the Pacific Northwest. And they're very large agreements. So the agreement with Umpqua Bank, which is the smallest of the three, for $11.1 billion to be invested in low and moderate income communities and communities of color in the bank's service area, which is primarily Oregon, Washington, and very North California. And it details metrics on housing, small business lending, community development lending, philanthropy that the bank needs to meet and is pledged to meet in a written agreement. And there are mechanisms that are being developed to advisory committees of community groups that half, and the bank names the other half of the members to implement those agreements. So it's taken a while to get to that. They're based on how you implement the Community Reinvestment Act for your community. So I guess I've never seen, I've been around a while, a series of agencies that have tried to move in this direction and drill down to this as much as the Biden administration during these years. And Barack Obama worked for me, as a young man, so I'm not against, other presidents. But a lot is happening here in this area. But I can tell you right now it's not enough, because unless you do things, you can't do this by the top down. You can't do it without doing it the top down, but it also has to be bottom up. Any luck with that last slide? He just added it last. It's an independent slide. It's the very last one that was added. It's kind of a chart. Yeah, a graphic. So, what does that mean? That means what often happens is that institutions, at least in the private sector, and sometimes in the public sector, will make commitments. And then they'll say, well, you don't really have the capacity to do this, so we really can't fund you, which is why Kat talks specifically about money being invested to give you that capacity, so you can, so you really can compete and do that stuff. But historically, it's, so NCRC, with groups like Housing Oregon, we organized, the past 6 years, we negotiated more than about $450 billion of commitments of banks to reinvest in communities. It took us 20 years to get to that point. We just really began to get to that point about 5 years ago. And in this graphic, and we're just gonna spend a minute on it, because I really think we need to do is to drill down into Bryan and Kat's presentation. But if you look at the bottom, communities have to decide, did I do that? Okay. Communities have to decide what they're gonna do. You need to develop capacity to do things. And you need to ask for accountability. And I'll give you one example, and I'll let this go, and maybe Kat will correct me here. But one of the things that we've been looking at is the amount of money that's being spent on climate remediation and how that's going to increase. And we looked at California after the fires and see, what companies got contracts for climate remediation, et cetera. And I'm talking about the EPA specifically. I don't even know the process for that. But very often, the communities that may have been flooded out or devastated by fires are not the communities who are necessarily doing the work and getting the contracts to fix those things. And people of color may not be engaged in those things. So the process of reinvestment is a process of organizing. And so we urge you to organize around public and private reinvestment and private investment as well as public. And the Housing Oregon and the Oregon Reinvestment Coalition will help you do that. Okay, so enough on that. We're done with that slide. And I want to just finish up and spend the rest of the time we have with you being able to ask questions and dialogue with both Bryan and Kat. So I'm going to, if you raise your hand, I'm going to try to move the mic around to you so that they can hear you. So anything you want to ask, please follow up now. Nobody? I would think you'd okay, I'm surprised. Okay, so then let me follow up a little bit on this and see where we want to go. So who's in the room? So just get a sense of who you are. If you could just, if you could only say your name and your organization and where it's located, just to get a sense of who we're talking to today. Real
My
fast.
name's Jill Lynn Warren. I'm a loan officer with Banner Bank. I'm also the legislative chair for OMBA.
Great, thank you.
Roberta Venegas with Banner Bank. Mary Schoen Clark, Savin CDC, Northeast Portland.
Great.
I'm Rachel Bedu. I'm with Network for Oregon Affordable Housing. Shay Smith, Artist Future.
Okay, if you speak loudly for the folks in the back.
Joel Matson, Executive Director of Mid-Columbia Housing Authority and Columbia Cascade Housing.
Hi, Jill.
Shannon Billhauer, Habitat for Humanity of Oregon. Leah Anderson, HUD. Kirsten Ray, HUD. Valencia Ocampo, Native American Youth and Family Services Housing Program.
Table, yeah, same.
Martin Singer, Carlson Art Architect.
Marley Baker, Fair Housing Council of Oregon. Laura Bauer, Portland Housing Center. Anna Gibbons from Exigy Bloom Housing.
Matthew Peterson, Oregon Multifamily Energy Program, based out of Portland.
Rachel Howard with the organized sector.
Raymond Olson, Umpqua Bank.
Hika Gujda from Community Partnership for Affordable Housing. I'm Yuko Swafford from Habitat Portland Region. Alexis Jagelski from Community Partners for Affordable Housing out of Southwest Portland.
Laura Dickerson, PCRI, Portland, Oregon, Watershed Counselor.
Joshua Robb, Innovative Housing here in Portland.
Grant from Casa, Oregon.
John Pruitt, Oregon DOJ.
Coach Ala is also from Casa, Oregon.
Abel Johnson, Stevens CDC, Northeast Portland.
Mike Pinsaki, U.S. Bank.
Heidi, Community Vision.
Mary, Community Housing Fund, Buffalo CDFI.
Andrea with Oregon Housing Community Services. Felicia Fournier from Oregon Housing and Community Services.
Okay, so my question to, thank you very much. Just wanted you to hear who is in the room as well as me hear that too. So if you, so you just gave all kinds of terrific information about funding opportunities and things that are being done. It can be somewhat overwhelming, so there has to be a point to start. And I think it was in each of your presentations, but if you could go back to that point and say, okay, if you're just starting here, what's your first step? And I know some of it was online, some of it was intermediaries, but let's repeat that for folks if we could. Where do you want them to start in the conversation?
Great question. Sorry, Habitat for Humanity. I didn't call you out earlier, but also got an Oregon Habitat for Humanity got a large award this year also from that. So the like my nightmare with these programs, I guess that's where I'll start, is big federal government, 60,000 foot levels, released all this funding, and it's going to go to the folks that always get it. East Coast, Central, large organizations, decades of experience applying for federal funds, reporting requirements, all that kind of stuff. And our challenges out here in the West are complete. Anytime I get an opportunity to get somebody from Washington, D.C. out and to go to East Portland or go to the fire damaged areas or anywhere in the state, like the magnitude of the challenges we're facing is not, I mean, it's just the population density on the East Coast, like there's certainly homeless there, but it's not unsheltered like here. And so the fact that all this money may go to folks that just kind of usually get it, like because there isn't the capacity at the organizations in the local level, that's where this technical assistance, finally the federal government has recognized, like, oh, there's got to be intermediaries. Like somebody's got to do the work. Somebody's got to go to your organization and say, we will help you write the grant, or we're going to bring together a state agency with a city and do a joint application for this funding, and we're going to do robust community involvement to find out about this. So because of scandals that happened in the 80s where different field offices would advocate, as they should, for their constituents, a lot of these national competitions got pulled from the field back to headquarters in kind of a blind competition. So a lot of our competitive programs at HUD, we can advise you right up into the point that a notice of funding opens, and then we're kind of hands off because we don't want to contaminate the selection process or give any sort of undue influence or anything like that. But as much as you can talk to us in the field, like come track us down and find your people in Oregon the actual humans that can reach back into headquarters and say, who is administering this program? What makes a competitive application? Like, what is the, you know, the neat thing is a couple of these programs, like Kat mentioned, they're rolling them out in rolling applications. And so we've just had the first round of Green Retrofit Awards in Oregon, nationally. No one in the Pacific Northwest was awarded these awards, but a lot of the feedback as to why that happened is being incorporated in a subsequent round. So it's an evolving process. So long answer, come find us, like come grab one of us. We'll find the human back in headquarters and connect you with that person as much as we can before a period closes where you can, you know, not get any sort of competitive advantage.
Okay, we have someone from the audience, so let's get her and then I'll turn to you. Thanks.
Well, thank you for all of this information and thank you for being here together. I think that's really an exciting aspect of this initiative right away. So speaking to that, I guess I'm thinking of all these homes we've underproduced in our state, and many of us are trying to build our capacity to ramp up production, whether it's new construction or retrofitting to be higher energy efficiency, both, right, are happening in homes statewide. And I guess I just wonder, like, there's an I'm always looking for that efficiency, right? Like, is there a way that we can use some of these funds rolling through the EPA to help underwrite like highly efficient HVAC systems in all these homes in our pipeline, but to like streamline that in, if that makes sense, so it isn't like Habitat's applying and housing authorities are applying and community action agencies, like, is that what's going to happen through our state office? I guess I see like a clearer path for solar for all than things like heat pump installation. Does that question make sense? It does make sense, and I think it highlights one of the big challenges that I spend a lot of my time thinking about, which is, you know, EPA is developing grant programs with our own set of requirements. To my knowledge, you know, EPA is not necessarily consulting HUD and vice versa on the development of our notices of funding opportunity. And so they hit the streets, and we kind of expect applicants to be able to do that math and say, here's how I'm going to braid these, you know, 4 lines of funding into a single project, and the timeline works really well. And that's a real challenge because it's not something that, you know, we're not creating a common app for federal grants across different federal agencies, or even within the same federal agency for different grant programs. So the requirements are going to be different, the eligible applicants are different, and it really is, you know, in a lot of ways your responsibility to think about how am I drawing from different lines and how am I going to compete to put a whole project together. And in the affordable housing space, and I think in the built environment more generally, EPA is often going to be able to support a slice of that pie, but we're not likely to, you know, I don't know of a program that says, you know, you can build a building here. It's, well, maybe there's a solar panel, maybe there are green retrofits, maybe, you know, there's a resilience hub model that we're going to explore. And so it really is, how do I put the other pieces together to make a full project? And this is why, you know, as Bryan said, the goal of these technical assistance centers or some of the funding roundtables that HUD and USDA Rural Development and EPA has been a part of, to say, at least let's get into the same room together and talk about what we have and maybe start to build that funding map for a particular project. But I'm really excited about the Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers, Willamette Partnership and University of Washington in Region 10, or TIC-TAC for short. So if you hear EPA people talking about the TIC-TACs, that's what we're referring to. And you know, we have very high hopes for these organizations that they're going to be able to help us answer some of these questions and really make sense of not just federal funding, but maybe there's foundation funding. We know that there's state funding, and that will vary state by state about what is available to help make a whole pie. And so I just urge you all to get to know the technical assistance centers and their partners in your region, because I think they're going to be able to build out a lot of those resources. So it's not, I don't
Yes.
have the answer, but hopefully
So
we're
let
building
me-
an ecosystem.
Let me try that question a little bit with less knowledge than Kat. So I'm working in a number of states for NCRC. We'll talk about Connecticut. So in Connecticut, there may well be 3 kinds of different intermediaries for some of these dollars. The Green Bank, which is a historic environment institution that invests in all kinds of green projects, quasi-public institution. The State Department, and then CDFIs, Community Development Finance Institutions, also likely to have funds in both grants and loans. And they could take Habitat or a series of affordable housing developers and say, we're going to increase your capacity to be able to utilize these dollars for a combination of grants and loans. And then, as you know, it's all in the specifics about how that's cut. The thing that I think is more ambiguous, and Kat may disagree, is I think some of the tax credit questions and the end user tax credit questions for low and moderate income folks who are historically not used tax credits, because a lot of the act is in tax credits too for heat pumps, et cetera, and smaller contractors of color, that sort of thing. I think there's work going underway now, but I think some of it still feels pretty ambiguous at the grassroots level, talking to contractors and people who do the work. It's not meant to stay ambiguous forever, but there are some questions to work out, and I'll say this, and then I'd like Kat to have an answer to the question that Bryan answered too about where to start. And that is that wealthy people who want to see their homes more efficient, or who want to see the benefits of solar, they probably can figure out how to do the application, et cetera. And there's government and other sources paying 100% for people below a certain income threshold. But for those people in between who are using a tax credit maybe a foreign experience for, that's where there has to be technical assistance, and there will be. Whether that technical assistance is sufficient or whether it needs to be more, one of the things that we're talking about in Connecticut is a role for housing counseling agencies, which historically have helped people navigate that kind of borrowing, those kind of improvements, those kinds of buying a home for them. So I think there's a lot of room for conversation. And Housing Oregon may know some other folks in Oregon who are working in this area, the Energy Trust and some other people who might partner around that. But I want to go back now. I want to probably end with this. I think Kat was very clear on where to start, but I think it's good to be hear it twice. So I'm going to have you end with that where to start question, if that's okay.
Yeah, reach out to your Tic-Tac. Find the Thriving Community Technical Assistance Center that's going to help support, and bring them your big ideas and say, here's what I want to accomplish. How do we get there? And then, build that partnership so that they can start to look across different federal agencies, state funding programs, foundation funding to help you braid together the funds that you need to support your project.
Is there anyone from the Willamette Tic Tac here? I know we called them to be part of this panel, and they were like, we need time. We're not ready yet. If we show our faces, everybody will, because the need is so extreme. But yeah, believe me, as soon as that's up and running, we will be out communicating through all of your organizations and our networks to spread the word. So
I'd like to say this, and banks are trying to figure out their role in this now also. There's certain things they've been doing, but this calls for a lot more. That's a process, and that's part of the dialogue we're having with them. So I want to thank both Bryan and Kat for being here and their presentations. It's terrific. I want to thank all of you for being here. In terms of the maps, I'll leave my cards up here if you want to pick up one. Just drop me an email. I'll send you the presentation, which will walk you through. Or if not, probably Kat can direct you to somebody who'll walk you through it too. Either way. Thank you so much. Lunch is across the way.
Is HUD actually reaching out? You said that you were speaking to the governor's staff. Are you guys helping direct the funds for her budget or massive